Well, thank you and welcome. I am very thankful to the University of Leicester and also to the University of Leicester United Nations Society for inviting me. More because since I met Mr. Paul Stott and I read about it, not in that detail, I got to know that, like he showed you on the slides, that this university was actually used by a terrorist organization, the Lashkar-e-Taiba, and by its chief to invite people or recruit people to fight in Kashmir. Hafiz Sayed, by ethnicity, is a Punjabi, is a Pakistani, and since then I always wished, although I've spoken at other universities, but I always wished to come to the University of Leicester as a Kashmiri and set the record straight that 23 years ago there was some Pakistani who came here to invite people to fight in my land for a cause which is, in my opinion, very much debatable. And now, 23 years after that, there's a Kashmiri coming to tell you the real story. So I'm very happy to be here. You have, of course, read the study guide, so I think, thinking of my university years, I assume some of you haven't read it, but I hope some of you have. But let me get into a little bit of history, because Mr. Stott talked about terrorism and the British South Asian nexus. I will mostly focus on the region, the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. There are a million definitions of terrorism, of course. I see it as mostly state actors and sometimes non-state actors using certain groups and individuals to violently and through intimidation pursue political aims and objectives. For me, that's a simple definition of terrorism, and we can go into more. I think the Oxford Dictionary has 12, so but for me this is it. And when you rightly said before me as well that the West normally thinks that terrorism started from 9/11, and Mr. Stott just explained that you should go back a little bit. I would like to go back a lot more. I would like to go back to the 1947 when British India, along with 500 plus princely states, got divided. And that's actually where, for the people of Kashmir, terrorism started. As some of you have read, British India was divided, and the princely states had the option of choosing either state, so acceding to any one of them. The ruler of Kashmir, Kashmir is the region of Jammu and Kashmir is a very particular, has a very particular, you can say, divisions within the region. You have a Muslim majority population, you have Hindus, you have Buddhists, and then you have a very large number of Muslims, but who are Shia Muslims in the region of Gilgit-Baltistan. So the ruler of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, at the time of partition was a Hindu, and he had a Muslim majority population. Let's not forget that rulers in those times, whether they were Britishers in Jammu and Kashmir, in India, in Pakistan, or in America, at those times human rights were not taken too much seriously. You know, any ruler, and we can go into the history of British colonialism, any ruler, his only religion is ruling. He does not, I don't see them as a Hindu ruler or a Muslim ruler or a Christian ruler. Their main objective is to rule, in which they at many times use religion as a pretext. So the ruler of Kashmir, of Jammu and Kashmir, was a Hindu with a Muslim majority population, and he chose to delay his decision. What he actually wanted is to become an independent state because he wanted to rule. And he offered to sign 2 standstill agreements with the newly formed Dominion of Pakistan and India. And Pakistan signed the agreement, and India wanted to discuss it further and asked for a ministerial level government servant of the ruler's government to talk about it. And that's in that context, 22nd October of 1947 is actually when terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir started. Why? Because it was invaded by tribals, mostly from the northwest frontier province of Pakistan, along with Pakistani regulars of the newly formed Pakistani army. There's a very good book of General Akbar Khan, this Pakistani general, who was heading the invasion of Kashmir. The book is called Raiders in Kashmir, and he explains very minutely how they helped the tribals, and along with the tribals went into Kashmir, actually came to 12 kilometers from the capital city of Jammu and Kashmir, Srinagar. In one night, in the city of Baramulla, they killed around 3,000 people in one night. And that's when terrorism in Kashmir started. And then, you know the history. The Maharaja asked India for help, signed an instrument of accession, there was a war, and then eventually it was taken by the Indian Prime Minister to the UN. You had, after that, until 1965, you had a pretty relatively peaceful period, in the sense that both the countries, of course, the newly formed countries, were trying to settle themselves into the new world order. You had India being non-aligned but close to the Soviet Union, and the Pakistanis being very close to the Americans. But moving ahead and coming to the 90s, because there have been skirmishes in between, but like said, there was the war in Afghanistan, supported by the West against the Soviets. And when the Soviets left Afghanistan, they left it in abundance of militant fighters, jihadists, terrorists, whatever you might call them, and a lot of weapons. And they needed to go somewhere. They needed to fight somewhere. They needed to be accommodated. And that was when, during that time, the president, the military ruler of Pakistan, Zia-ul-Haq, came with an operation which he devised, which was called the Operation Topak, which would be sending these abundance of terrorists to Jammu and Kashmir to fight over there. Because the claim of the state of Pakistan to Jammu and Kashmir is that it's a Muslim majority area, and as such should be part of the state of Pakistan, which I personally don't think is correct. You know, Pakistan was built on religion in 1947, and it got separated in 1971. There are more Muslims living in Bangladesh now than in Pakistan. So if religion was the uniting force, you would never have Bangladesh. There are an equal amount of Muslims living in India, so then you would have never separated, and you would have not been divided in 1971 again. So these terrorists went to Kashmir to fight. And you have seen the map. Kashmir is not only Indian administered Kashmir. You also have a part which is under administration of Pakistan, and you have a part which is under administration of China. What happened is that the Kashmir issue in itself is a very political issue. There are genuine grievances of the people of Kashmir towards India, Pakistan, and China. I was just talking before I came inside, but the essence is that although you deserve justice, we should accept, whether we like it or not, we should accept the world order. The world order today, and for the last 20 years, 30 years, does not accept violence as a means to achieve political aims. No matter what you want, no matter how just your cause might seem to you, that is just not accepted. So in the 90s, when the gun was introduced into Kashmir, you had people from, because I come from Kashmir, my direct family lives in the Indian administered part of Kashmir, and I have family living in the Pakistani part of Kashmir as well. There were people, youngsters from the Indian part of Kashmir, who were taken through the line of control, the de facto border between divided Kashmir, to Pakistan, to the Pakistani administered part of Kashmir, and were trained in weapons, ammunition, guerrilla tactics. And then after a week or two, they were sent back to fight the Indian state, which, of course, warranted and resulted in a response from the Indian state. And at the end of the day, when you have these fights and you have these bullets all over the place, it's the common man which is suffering, which was the Kashmiri. What also gave it a very non-political color is that the demands were only within the Muslim community. The militants, the terrorists were also Muslims, and their demands were also often rule of Islamic Caliphate. You hear ISIS and Taliban. We had this in late 80s, beginning of 90s, we had this in Kashmir. So the political nature of the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, because of the gun, because of terrorism, changed into a very violent and a very terrorist issue for India, Pakistan, and the world. And this kept on going for until now. You still have terrorist attacks in Kashmir. You still have, although they are less in number now, but you have youngsters joining terrorist organizations. You have local Pakistanis, Afghans coming to Kashmir to fight against the Indian forces. So the terrorism issue is very much there, which has, in my opinion, and that's why we are here, we have a debate on terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir. I hope and I believe that the debate is not whether terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir is good or bad. I think we all agree on that it's not good. The reason we are here is we are going to discuss how we can find a solution to such an issue. What should be done and what has it achieved until now. In the 70s, Yasser Arafat and Nelson Mandela earlier also took to violent means, but that was a very different world order. It changed after that. I still remember from my university days, I had friends wearing Che Guevara t-shirts or Free Palestine t-shirt and even Free Tibet t-shirt. I don't see them now anymore because thinking and world orders, political scenarios, they evolve, and you need to evolve with it. So I hope we can discuss what it actually achieved in terms of losses. Different estimates, but international estimates are around 70,000 people in Kashmir from the 90s until today have died, which inevitably also means a lot of orphans, a lot of widows. Kashmir in the last 28 years has been closed for business, schools, for around 6.5 years. So in 28 years we have lost, in terms of business, in terms of schooling, in terms of education, in terms of traveling, we have lost 6.5 years. So many times when we discuss how far South Asia is and how far the West is, we always say, you know, we South Asians are at least 100 years behind the West. We Kashmiris are at least 106 years because we lost those 6 years extra. In terms of environment, ecological impact, you know, terrorism is not just picking up the gun and firing around you and killing people. You also, because of terrorism, what you actually do, you challenge law and order, you challenge the system, and that brings in new players into society. You get mafias, you get timber mafias, you get mafias who grab land, you get mafias who grab houses, you get mafia who grab shops, you even get mafias who become big things in human trafficking. You know, not everyone wants to go for war. Not everyone wants to go for jihad, which is which many people refer to when they fight for a religious cause, especially in the Muslim community. So, from a Kashmiri perspective, I would say that the war, the facet of terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir has actually only hurted the interest of the people of Kashmir. There was a political issue. It was made much more difficult because of intermittently signing different agreements between two countries. You had a war in 47, you go to the UN, then you have a war in 71, you sign another agreement between India and Pakistan in Simla, where you agree it's a bilateral issue. Then you have the 1999 Kargil war, you sign another agreement in Lahore, and in the meantime terrorism is still growing. In 2017, there were 200 terrorists killed in the Valley of Kashmir, and out of those 200 terrorists, 70% were not Kashmiris. They were Pakistani nationals who came to Kashmir to fight. Just recently, you had last month, you had a dozen terrorists killed in the valley only. So, main issue of introducing terrorism into Kashmir by the Pakistani state, by the Pakistani military, by the Pakistani intelligence agencies, and then keeping it to the valley of Kashmir only, was to arouse the Muslim religious sentiments of the people living over there. Because you have a bigger region, which is Kashmir. There was no terrorism there. There is no terrorism in Ladakh, because most of the people are Buddhist. So there's not a unifying force. Religion, of course, can be a very uniting and a unifying force, which in turn turned the issue into a very religious issue. And religious issues don't work well. When you have a political issue and you keep it politically and your struggle is political, you can get to some solution. Religious issues are very difficult to solve. I was very happy a few days, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, when I saw the North Korean and the South Korean leader shaking hands. And I felt, you know, the world might be looking at India and Pakistan as well, which they don't seem to realize, unfortunately, because a solution to the issue of Jammu and Kashmir will not only be beneficial to the people of Jammu and Kashmir, but it will be foremost beneficial to the people of India and Pakistan. India and Pakistan are actually, just like North and South Korea, they have been one. They are the same people with the same culture, the same language in many parts, and yet they seem not to reconcile, mostly because of this issue of Jammu and Kashmir. So I always say that whatever is beneficial for the people of Jammu and Kashmir will prove to be beneficial for the states of India and Pakistan, which I think they should start realizing. But then again, we are not, and I believe, I will not put you up with that Herculean task of solving the Kashmir issue today. There have been many people trying to solve it for the last 70 years, and actually trying to make it more complex for the last 70 years. But what I want you to focus on, because I believe that peace inevitably will create an atmosphere of tranquility, which eventually will evolve into talking to each other, trying to find a solution. But until and unless there is peace, many people would say you first have a solution and then you have peace. I would say no, you first have peace and then you can talk towards a solution. So the first and foremost thing in Jammu and Kashmir should be that terrorism must be brought to a halt. It must be stopped. So what can be done in your view, in your perspective, to get to that point? And then you need to remember that there is a very big army in Pakistan, for example, who has a history of using terrorism, of using proxies, of using religion as a tool to pursue strategic objectives. You know, I find this term of good and bad terrorist, I find that so strange, but it was coined in Pakistan. What is a good terrorist? In my opinion, the only good terrorist is a dead terrorist. You don't have other good terrorists. But you have this term, good and bad terrorists. So good terrorists are those who, according to the state, pursue their strategic objectives, and bad terrorists who are not doing the same, who are pursuing someone else's strategic objectives. So that's one thing you need to remember. On the other side, you need to remember that the issue has been intricated by religion. There is a very big force in Pakistan who believe in radical Islam. You know, Hafiz Sayyid is still in Pakistan. Masood Azhar is still in Pakistan. They are trying to establish political parties. You have a big number of people who use religion and then in a very violent way to pursue political aims, and when that doesn't work, they try to get into a political process in order to pursue the ideology they have. So that's one thing to remember. On the other hand, from the last 28 years, when terrorism is imposed in Jammu and Kashmir on the people of Kashmir, when it is very much religiously founded, the society of Jammu and Kashmir has also in some way radicalized. You know, you see many youngsters, or there are youngsters who join these terrorist forces. I understand it. I don't condone it. I understand it because, you know, young people are very much, I hope, romantic people who get very much influenced by romanticism of these ideologies, of these fighters, of these terrorists. You know, you have people from, just like it was said a few minutes ago, you have people from Britain, you have people from Belgium, you have people from established European civilized societies who leave everything behind, take a flight to Turkey and join ISIS in order to fight for the establishment of an Islamic caliphate or whatever they believe in. So for some youngsters in a conflict zone like Jammu and Kashmir, I do understand that they also get influenced by that romanticism, believing that indeed there needs to be one rule, one Islamic caliphate, and everyone in the world is trying to work towards that, or every Muslim is trying to work towards that. So that's also something which you need to take into consideration, is that how do you de-radicalize? So one is really picking up the gun and and go and fight or blowing yourself up. One is just a step before that. How do you radicalize someone who really believes that but just hasn't reached the point to go and blow himself up? How do you do that? And how do you do that with one person, but how do you do that with 1,000? You know, if 1,000 people who are radicalized suddenly start or decide to blow themselves up, you have a lot of trouble. So you also need to find a way to de-radicalize them, to get them mainstream into society. Yoana said it before. I personally believe that education plays a very big part. Some would say you also have engineers joining terrorist organizations. True. But how many engineers do not? So this argument is very flawed. If you have 10,000 terrorists and you have 10 of them being engineers or doctors and you use that as an argument, you know, education doesn't work because we have 10 educated people joining terrorist organizations. Well, I can show you 10 million who didn't. So education does work. If you dissect the demography of terrorists, these are not very well educated people most of the times, at least not mainstream educated well. They might be professors in religion or whatever, but mainstream, not many. You don't have them so much. So I am really looking forward to your suggestions, and aside from the fact that I wanted to set Hafiz Said's record straight by talking here and telling you the actual thing, he recruited people for jihad and religious warfare. I am telling you very clearly the Jammu and Kashmir issue was never religious. He's one of the people who made it, which actually worked in our, not in our favor. It has resulted in death and destruction of the society in Jammu and Kashmir. It has brought India and Pakistan to many wars, even nuclear wars. It has deprived the people of India and Pakistan and the people of Jammu and Kashmir from the very rich resources South Asia has. So it was very necessary for a Kashmiri to come and tell you that he was wrong, and this terrorism has only given us death and destruction. On the other hand, why this was being done, I really like to see, because I really like to see the young perspective on an issue which is so complex. You know, young people many a times have very different narratives, very interesting narratives of how things can work, and sometimes very simple narratives. And that's, for a person like me who is so much involved in this issue, academically but also emotionally, it sometimes becomes very difficult to think simple. And that's one of the most difficult things, to think simple. I always get into religion. How do you solve that? How do you get the gun out of Jammu and Kashmir? How do you change the Pakistani army's mindset? How do you change the politicians' mindset in India? Perhaps you also have certain elements in India who are radicalized. How do you change that? How do you get to a point where they all can work together? And someone of you might just find the answer because you don't think about those things and take a step back and think very simply. So I'm looking forward to a very interesting discussion, also a very heated discussion. I don't know how many people of you are really aware of the issue and how many are not, but feel free. Mrs. Stott is going to stay here, I'm going to stay here. We're going to follow your discussions. Feel free to ask. You know, nobody is the tree of knowledge, but if you don't know it, feel free to ask. Feel free to ask advice, and let's get into this session not with the aim or the intention to solve anything, because when you're going to go into a debate with the intention of reaching a conclusion at the end of the day, you might forget perspectives. Let's get into the discussion with the aim of learning from each other, of hearing others' perspective on the issue, and getting a more comprehensive outlook on the whole region and on the whole issue. And that will form the basis for solutions, and maybe we'll do that again and again, and maybe hopefully when your children will be studying at this university, they might find a solution. So let's hope for that. Thank you very much.